Story 1. AI is a good answer, but in reality, it is unchecked power in the hands of unelected wealthy people and the human tendency towards passivity. Frank Herbert had some excellent quotes on all of the above. Governments, if they endure, always tend increasingly toward aristocratic forms. No government in history has been known to evade this pattern, and as the aristocracy develops, government tends more and more to act exclusively in the interests of the ruling class, whether that class be hereditary royalty, oligarchs of financial empires, or entrenched bureaucracy. All governments suffer a recurring problem. Power attracts pathological personalities. Once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. Story 2. Murdoch's News Corporation is the root of so much that has gone wrong in the world and has been left unquestioned, so destined to repeat itself or grow worse. Story 3. Social media. We're self-absorbed, lazy, and fed news in tiny 15-second clips, forming a whole personality on this information with no desire to fact-check or validate. We form opinions without any research and go full speed ahead on activism, denying evidence and statistics because we can't admit we're wrong or our entire fragile, narcissistic existence unravels. We need information in seconds even if it's false or underdeveloped, and so we push for changes at that pace without analyzing the consequences because who has time to actually give any thought to the future outcomes? Story 4. Humanity's own stupidity and unwillingness to learn are responsible for all the issues that could be an answer to this. Climate change, war, artificial intelligence, all because humanity wants things faster and easier, and no one creating these issues or things that make these issues worse is ever willing to learn. Story 5. Fascism. When my father was 19, he was in a war against fascists. Now, my oldest grandson is a 24-year-old lieutenant in a country falling under the control of fascists. Maybe humanity really is just a plague on the universe. Story 6. Fungi. The spores are practically impossible to eliminate. Viruses die because they degrade over time. Bacteria cannot survive antibiotics. But we have nothing to kill spores reliably unless we kill everything alive with flame, copper solution, or radiation. Story 7. Centralized censorship to guide minds. Do not say that, do not do that, do not act like that, not allowed, not appropriate, you do not belong here. All decided by a group of enthusiasts. Story 8. Bad solar storms or the Earth crossing paths with a decent-sized meteorite or asteroid. All of the above are common in the Earth's past, and there's no reason to believe they won't be common in the future, such as the Tunguska event and the Carrington event. And sleep well. Story 9. All it takes to turn our world upside down is a power outage. Imagine the 2024 CrowdStrike incident from Microsoft but on a wider scale. It affected healthcare services from being rendered, planes everywhere were grounded, financial services, businesses, etc. Story 10. The unchecked intelligence communities who operate both voice-to-skull technology, also known as synthetic telepathy, and remote neural monitoring. They operate above the common law of any land in complete secrecy and have been, in my personal experience, less than moral in their attempts to torture me, torment me, harass me, and control my mind. I suspect they use this immense power internationally to keep American dominance alive and well. However, they do it at the cost of everyone else, including their own domestic population. Story 11. Complacency and inability to make sacrifices. We know what is wrong, we know what we must do to stop it, but we do very little to actually make change, settling for a superficial appearance of change. Story 12. I see a lot of great answers here, like climate change, poverty, and education. However, we can't solve those problems if we can't talk with each other. Tribalism has always existed, but the internet has supercharged it and incentivized it in a way that we've never experienced before. Story 13. Greed. Without question, the segment of the population that believes "give me more" outweighs everything, including damage to the environment such as fossil fuels, destruction of families like social media platforms, exploiting health and well-being such as insurance companies, and political corruption like the Republican Party. This mindset is a cancer. The treatment starts with voting every Republican out everywhere as soon as possible. Story 14. People who pretend to have knowledge they couldn't possibly have or prove, using that fiction to tell everyone else how to live. Liberal democracy put religion in its place and allowed people to be themselves without religion punishing them for being human. Then religious people started feeling oppressed by this newfound freedom for people they oppose. Story 15. Known issues that aren't adequately covered are tracked by some organizations like Effective Altruism or the people who look at the doomsday clock. You want to evaluate what is actually dangerous versus what just feels that way. In my opinion, with a long-term view, our biggest threat is that this planet has a clock on it for how long we can stay here. If we don't find somewhere else to go, we are in trouble. I think all the other dramas are distractions. The biggest threat is that we don't work together towards our joint safety, essentially. Story 16. I don't know if this really answers the question. So take the Fermi paradox. Billions upon billions of planets and no visitors or detection of advanced life. Could be a yet issue. But one theory why is that once a civilization reaches a certain maturity, it kills itself. This is why I think democracy is the best system of government. If humanity were to blink out, it needs to be everyone's fault. As a matter of fact, there really is no reason it wouldn't be all of our fault even if we felt we lived under some dystopian dictatorship. Hitler thrived under the German democracy. We are our own worst enemy. Story 17. Our problems are getting harder, but our ability to meet them is becoming greater as well. If we believe in the potential for a better future and make the effort to get there, we can achieve great things. Therefore, our greatest threats are conservatism and cynicism. The people who are actively trying to stop or reverse our progress towards solving our problems and the people who believe they cannot be solved and we're doomed anyway. Story 18. Our intellect is evolving faster than our instincts. We are gaining more and more knowledge, but we still have primitive instincts that prevent us from being the best we can be. On the contrary, our instincts cause us to use our intelligence to find ways to hurt each other more and more. Story 19. Assuming we can sort our issues out before descending into World War III, it's antibiotic resistance. It is here already. There is now a strain of gonorrhea that is completely resistant to all antibiotics. There's no treatment. No cure. This will be the new human immunodeficiency virus epidemic. The thing that most people don't realize is that two unrelated strains of bacteria can pass bits of genetic material, known as plasmids, between each other. So a resistant gonorrhea can gift complete resistance to a streptococcus, staphylococcus, Escherichia coli, Yersinia, etc. However, fertility rates are plummeting, and while a number of potential causes are suggested, microplastics are top of the list. There's no conclusive proof, for a very concerning reason. In order to determine the effects of microplastics, we need a control group, people with no microplastics in their system. The two groups are compared for outcomes. The issue is there is not a single person left in the world free of microplastics. The upside is we can breed bacteria with no microplastics and then introduce them to the bacteria and see what happens. The downside was that the bacteria all died, so no data was collected. The hopeful conclusion is that microplastics will ensure antibiotic resistance is not such a big threat after all. Story 20. Ignorance and hate, they are tied. Both are used to keep the common man at war with each other while the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. People do not care because if someone had something awful happen to them but did not politically or religiously believe the same as them, then they are beneath basic human empathy. Story 21. Nuclear war, global pandemic, asteroid strike, climate change, artificial intelligence, uncontrolled nanobots, infertility crisis, supernova irradiation, and alien invasion. Story 22. The fact that most of humanity is controlled by politicians and dictators who do not care at all about protecting the planet so it will continue to sustain life, and those who are not controlled by such people will suffer the consequences just the same as those who are. Story 23. The race to complexity. We should be building things that last forever. We should be making complicated things simpler. Of all the evils you could attribute to capitalism, planned obsolescence is the worst one for us as a species. Story 24. Strong-man leaders of countries, reverting to a pre-World War I empire-building mentality. Then, when one of them gets their feelings hurt because they lose a country to another strong man, They fire off a nuclear weapon, igniting a mutually assured destruction retaliation. Empires nuke empires, and only the cockroaches survive. Until we evolve away from affinities for strongman leaders, we will continually be on the razor's edge of self-destruction. Story 25. The biggest existential risk for humanity is some sort of nanotechnological or biotechnological catastrophe. Some mindless self-replicating machine or super disease that destroys us all with no chance of defense. The biggest risk for individual humans is probably still natural aging, followed by cancer. We are getting closer to solving both of those, but in the meantime, people will continue to die. Story 26. Regimes. Basically, anything that turns your life as an individual into utter turmoil if you break out from the usual citizen line. Be it left, communist party, etc. Right, corporations, or even the middle, total anarchy, which means either side will take over. Story 27. Decomposition of mental and social functioning due to living in circumstances our brains are not made for. Lack of socialization, parenting, and lack of consequences and accountability, along with positive rewards feedback, creates dysfunctional people. Story 28. Our inability to recognize that what we truly want and what will ultimately create long-lasting happiness can only be found through a shared compassion and understanding of other humans, not in the lying elected officials or religious leaders we currently put our blind faith in. The accountability and action come from us, but it's easier to blame someone else or tell ourselves that some bearded guy in heaven has a plan for us. Story 29. Fascism. It is the ideology of evil and takes root in people's hearts in the most sinister ways. It convinces them to abandon their humanity and see others as less than human. Story 30. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Building resources for innovation and development of global enterprises, environmental, social, and governance deeply rooting in high-impact areas of engineering, medicine, science, infrastructure, security, etc. Recent events in California will be a case study for the future. Thoughts and prayers for those affected. Story 31. The future of energy, population destabilization, disparity of wealth, global warming, artificial intelligence replacing jobs and being weaponized, nuclear warfare, virus outbreak, slavery. But the main roadblock for humanity, the way I see things, is the depletion of fossil fuels. Story 32. We are terrible at comparing the immediate pros and long-term cons. We, as a species, have a tendency to spend far more time addressing what are perceived as rewards and issues in the immediate moment rather than looking forward at the likelihood of long-term consequences of our actions. As a result, we tend to take the far easier pathways forward for the immediate conveniences that come as a result, regardless of the long-term repercussions. Some examples of this: use of fossil fuels. Great and convenient fuel source, but it is limited, has high pollution, and is causing dramatic, world-altering changes in the environment that will lead to a mass extinction event. Even if that weren't the case, society will have a major collapse in the next 100 years when we suddenly run out. Nuclear energy source. Very convenient, cleaner than fossil fuels, but it also creates buckets of radioactive waste that we store underground, hoping it never leaks into an aquifer and that a plant never explodes because everything on the continent would die from it. Plus, if or when society collapses, then they are all just ticking time bombs. And even 100,000 years from now, it will still be a radioactive hazard. Nuclear weapons. Great weapon with massive consequences if everyone presses all their big red buttons. Overuse of antibacterials. Practically mandatory for modern-day medicine. Is the cure and precaution for countless diseases and infections that would either kill or handicap. Is basically mandatory for surgery. Unfortunately, sicknesses will inevitably develop an immunity to the things we use to kill them off. This one is quite possibly beyond our control. Plastics. Convenient for packaging, furnishing, food storage, etc. Is used everywhere. It is a byproduct of the fossil fuel refining process. It does not biodegrade. Exposure to ultraviolet light slowly breaks it down into microplastics that have basically infiltrated all water and food sources on the planet now. There is so much plastic trash out there that literal continent-sized piles of it are floating in the oceans and veritable hill-sized garbage dumps on land, or just massive roadside dumps in places where the cleanup is not addressed. Agricultural consequences. Farming results in the topsoil thinning to an unsustainable degree, both from heavy erosion that occurs in tilled farmlands and from the exporting of the food that grew by pulling nutrients out of those lands. As a result, eventually, the topsoil will be incredibly thin and bear consequences in the future. Many reports show the drops in field elevations over the years, several feet over the century. Deforestation and pollution. Plants and the ocean are the lungs of the earth. We have a tendency to cut them down or fill them with trash that slowly kills off the life forms. Animal populations. Even before fossil fuels were a thing, mankind had a tendency to hunt species to extinction. Mammoths, rhinos, wolves. Not to mention that our damage to environments like the plastic and chemical pollution and the deforestation heavily limits their environments. Mankind has already been logged as a mass extinction event. The climate change, nuclear weapons, and pollution are just the current and likely final acts. But our categorization into the bracket started thousands of years ago. Introduction of invasive species. Pretty much every one of them was because somebody wanted it in their garden, or B, somebody wanted it as a pet.